Here we go. So we're going to create a app that basically plays a very simple guessing game. So the computer thinks of a number between 1 and 10, and then it asks you through the scanner to kind of guess what number the computer is thinking of, and it'll tell you if you're too high or if you're too low, and then it will what? Oh, really? Okay, so you kind of have a head start on it. Someone said it was his dice game. Okay, so we're going to have two class files. One's going to be the driver, and that's going to be like the dealer in a casino. It's going to do all the playing, and then or all of the organization of the game and figuring out who wins, who loses, dealing out the points, all of that stuff. And then the other class is going to be the player class. And the player just plays. That's all the player does, right? That sounds like a Taylor Swift song, isn't it? So the player is going to just play. It's going to have a play method. You call play, it just plays. It's dumb. It doesn't even know if it won or not. The driver is the one that kind of organizes all of that. Okay, so we're going to say public. Let's create both of them right now. We're going to say public class guess number. And that's going to be the driver. So we'll close our brackets. We're going to go ahead and click Save. And I'm going to go over to create a new folder, and we'll call it GuessNumber game or something. And we'll just save it in here. Remember that the name of the class has to match the name of the file. If you change the name of the class, you got to rename the file, otherwise it's not going to work. Okay, so that's our first one, and then we're going to create a second one. We're going to call this player. So we're going to say public class player. Whoops. Okay, and then we'll save that too. Oh, wait. I'm going to call this a human player. And we'll human player. Okay? So let's start working on the driver. We've got two now. We've got the guess number and the human player. Remember that the driver file has a main method. So we're going to say public static void main string args. Okay? You just got to memorize that. It's every Java program has to have one main method in one of the class files, and that's what you run when you compile it and you highlight it, you press run. Okay, so in the main method, this again is going to keep track of what, put our name. This keeps track of the game itself. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say, let's create some human players. Human player, human, equals new human player. Okay? And the guess number, what we're going to want to do with the guess number is we actually want to have it keep track of the answer, right? Because it's going to generate whatever the answer is. So within the main method, let's just go ahead and let's generate an answer. Let's say int answer equals, and then we want this to be a random number between 1 and 10. So we'll just say, random number. I'll fill that in later. We also wanted to keep track of whether the game's been won or not. So let's just say Boolean. Let's create a Boolean variable and we'll call it 1. And we'll say 1 is false. And just so that I can remember why I'm creating these instance variables, I'm putting in comments. Okay? And we've created our new human player. And now we can actually start the game. And what we want to do is we want to actually create a loop that continues until the player guesses the right answer. Okay. We may need to move some of these around if we're going to run a series of trials. But at least let's just say that when you run the game, it's going to play one game of guess number. So what we'll say is while 1 is equal to false, do the stuff that's in here. And as soon as 1 gets set to true, it's going to exit. So let's say while 1 is equal to false, what we're going to do is we're going to say system.out.println. I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 10. This is just interface stuff, right? This is so you know what's going on. So this actually, let me take this out and put it up here because we only want this to say it once, otherwise it's going to say it a whole bunch of times. So let's put the intro stuff here, and then we'll say, what's your guess? And what we wanted to do is we wanted to keep track of whatever the guess is that the person has inputted. So we're going to say int guess. That creates a new variable of type int, and it's going to call it guess. And we're going to say, okay, guess takes the value of whatever the human player has entered in. And what do we call the human player? Human, right? Human.play. So what that does is it goes to the human player class and it calls the play method. And the play method is going to return an int value, and that's going to go into guess. We haven't written that yet, but this is what's going to happen, right? Takes int from human player. And then what we want to do is, figure out okay. And then if you guessed it, set 1 equal to true. And that should exit our whole loop. And then I think we should be good. So that's the first part where we're setting up the guess number section. Now we're going to go over and we're going to sort of set up the human player. And the reason why we're setting up these classes in this way is because I want to create one game that will play against a computer or a human being. So that without changing the driver, instead of saying human.play, I could say computer.play and set this up so it doesn't really matter how that number is come up with, how that guess is come up with. It could be an algorithm that comes up with it, or it could be a scanner input that gives it to us. But as far as the driver is concerned, it really doesn't care. All it's looking for is a number. And that's why we're setting it up in this way. So, so let's go back over to the human and kind of let the human do it. We're going to need to do one more thing that we're going to have to modify this, I think, because the human needs to know whether it was too high or too low. We're going to need to give the human some input as to whether their guess was too high or too low, and it needs to be the same way that we would give input to a computer player as well. So we're probably going to have to send a parameter in here, but we will cross that bridge a little later. So the human player, by default, I don't think we need a constructor at all. If you don't supply a constructor in Java, Java supplies one for you as a default. So this is very simple. All we need to do is create public. We're setting this up as a public method so that the guess number class can reach it. If it were a private method, it wouldn't be able to reach it. So we're going to say public. That's public or private, basically. That's the visibility. Now we're going to have to give a return type. This is going to return a number because when we say play, we want it to return a number. So we need to say int because it's returning an int. If it weren't returning anything, we would say void. So sometimes you'll see in a method header, it'll be marked void. That's because that method header doesn't return anything. But in this case, we want to return a number, and by the time we finish our method, we need to have returned a value. If the compiler doesn't see return something, it's going to kick back an error and say, I can't run this. It needs to return an error. It needs to return a number of some sort. So the int is basically telling the compiler we're going to return a value at the end of this. Play is the name of it, and we're going to put the stuff here. Now, if I wanted to say something like return 1, then every single time play was called, it would return 1. Now, that's kind of dumb because you'd never win a guessing game, right? So what we really want to do in the human player is we want to ask the human from the scanner, okay, like what's your number? So we're going to put this in here, and we're going to say import java.util.scanner semicolon. And so now we actually can create stuff. And you probably remember, you're going to need to go back through your code and look at some of the other labs that you've done. Those are really good resources because you can copy and paste. If you forget how do you instantiate a scanner object, how do you generate a random number, all of that stuff you can look up in your code. I just know this stuff, so I'm going to type it in. Scanner KB equals new scanner system.in. Okay, so now we just created a new scanner object called KB, and so now we can call from KB. All right, so now instead of returning that, what we want to do is we want to say, first thing we want to do is we want to tell the human what the result was of the last guess. Okay, and then what we want to do is ask for a new guess. And the reason why I'm doing it this way is because the play method is going to get called at the beginning of the game and in the middle of the game. It's going to get called repeatedly because we're in a while loop. So we need to know what the result was from the last guess, and then we need to ask for a new guess. Okay. So that means what we're going to have to do in the driver is we're going to have to send in some signal that tells the human player what the result of the last guess was. So that's called a parameter. And so we're going to send in a parameter as an int, okay? And we can just call it int result. And now when I refer to result, it's going to be whatever was passed in when the play method was called. How do you pass numbers when the play method is called? You pass it in this way. Okay, so we can just call it result here, and we'll declare it up here. And I'll put in a comment to remind me of what it is. What int result is it starts out at 0, and int result essentially is the whether you're too high or too low. It's sort of like a signal. And it's just my secret code for myself in this. Nobody's going to see -1, 0, or 1. And in reality, I could call it anything. I could make it 100, -100, or whatever. It's just a code that kind of is going to tell the player, whether it's a computer player or a human player, what the feedback is for what they guessed. But the first time, before I do anything else, result's going to be 0. So in here, tell the human what the result was of the last guess. Let's just say if result equals, remember, 0, not equals 0, but if it equals 0, then you're going to system.out.println welcome to the game. Because we know if it's the only time it's ever going to come in as a 0 is if you've never guessed before. Because at that point, you're always going to check, is it too high or too low, and you're going to send it, you're going to basically set it to -1 or 1 at that point. And then we're going to ask for a new game, but let's also say, let's copy that. If the result is -1, print out too low. If the result is 1, print out too high. And then if you actually guess it, I think the driver is just going to say player 1, 1 or player 2, 1 or whatever. So now we want to ask for a new guess. And the way that you would do that is you would basically say, are we system.out.println? I think this already prints. What's your guess? So I think, yeah, I think we just need to say int, human guess equals, we got to use a scanner method. And to remind yourself what methods the scanner uses, you can always go to Java Docs. Remember I told you guys Java Docs scanner. Scanner is the name of the library that we're using. Now you may remember that it's next int, but get in the habit of Googling Java Docs and then the name of the Java libraries just to remind yourself. Or if this is buggy, that's how you can check to make sure that you spelled next int correctly, or if it's a string you want next line, right? Okay, kb.nextInt. Okay, so we've just created human guess. So the human guess is entered their guess, and then now instead of returning 1, we can just return human guess. So just to summarize, what we've just created is we've created a play method that takes a parameter called result. Result is initially 0, but every time subsequently it's going to return a -1 or a 1 based on whether your guess was too low or too high. And that's going to inform, hopefully the human will know if it's too low, they're going to guess higher. So the human player is done at this point. All we need to do is finish up this. So the random number for answer is, again, we're going to cast it. And we're going to say math.random, which returns a number from 0 to almost but not quite 1. So we're going to multiply it by 10 because we're getting a random number at this point. 0 to 9 is what you're going to get. And then so we're just going to add 1 to make sure that's 1 to 10. So now answer is going to be some random number between 1 and 10 inclusive. And like I said before, look up your old labs if you want to get the syntax for that. Okay, so here's the deal. We got to figure out whether we're too high or too low. Okay, so we've got human.play result has now returned us some number, and that number is now living in guess. Guess now carries the value of what the human player played. So now we just got to figure out whether too high or too low. We're going to say, okay, if guess is less than answer, then we would want to, at this point, just set result takes the value of what? If guess is less than the answer, you're too low. Yeah. Okay. And then because I only want one thing to happen, I'm going to say else. We only want one. It's either going to be too high or too low, or it's going to be it. So we're going to say else if guess is greater than the answer, then the result is equal to 1. Okay? And then we're going to say else 1 takes the value of true. And 1 is our Boolean variable that we declared up here. So why don't we say if guess equals answer? I'm going to answer my own question. So the reason is because if guess is not less than the answer and guess is not greater than the answer, then the only other possibility is that it must be the answer. There's no other possibility. And if I said else if 1 equals true, else if guess equals answer, do this, sometimes what will happen is the compiler will spit back an error and it'll say, okay, yeah, but what if none of those 3 things is true? Now we know logically one of those 3 will always be true, but the compiler, Java, wants to know what to do in every circumstance. And so that's why generally you check for one condition, you check for the next condition, and then you have a catch-all, else, so it knows what to do. Sometimes you just have to say else return 0 or something, and it's never going to reach that last else statement because one of the other ones will always be there. But Java is set to only compile when all conditions, all possible conditions are met. And it doesn't evaluate your code to the same level so that it looks and knows, okay, if it's not less than and it's not greater than, it's got to be equal to. So that's why I basically just say else 1 equals true, because I know that's the only other case, and that covers every other possible case. Okay? Now, as soon as 1 is true, it should exit this whole loop. So I don't know at this point what we would want it to say. Maybe we can just say, good game or something. Okay, but that basically covers it. So I'm going to compile it, and it's going to crash, and then we'll fix the bugs. So let's figure out. Oh, it actually worked. All right. So that's so there's no compile time errors, but there are probably runtime errors. So that's when we're actually going to test it, and we'll see what happens. All right. Let me move this thing up. We'll hit run. I'm thinking of number between 1 and 10. What's your guess? Welcome to the game. It knows welcome to the game because it passed in a 0. So let me say 5. Too low. That's a little weird. It should say too low. What's your guess? I don't know how to fix that. You can figure that out. Too low. Okay, 9. Good game. So maybe instead of saying good game, we should say you won. So I got to recompile, and then we're going to run it. Okay. Too low. You won. Okay, that's pretty cool. That's awesome. Now, there are other ways that you could probably think of to improve this. Like, I want to know how many guesses it took me. Right? So figure out if you can maybe keep track of a variable and let the computer know how many guesses it took. Some other areas, so your job for the lab is to recreate this, and then we're also going to ask you to create a computer player so that instead of calling from the scanner, it just calls public int play. So let me do this. Let me just say public dumb computer. And we're going to create a dumb computer opponent. The reason why I didn't autofill dumb computer is because I declared it wrong. I didn't say public class. So let me just put that in. Okay, but the public class dumb computer is basically going to do this. It's going to say public void public int play. And again, the method header has to look like this, int result. It has to match. But the dumb computer is going to return 5 every time. But that's all you need to do, essentially, to create a really dumb computer. And then when you actually play this game, you could say, instead of human player human, we can just say computer dumb computer. And then now all we need to do is say comp play result. And so now the human's out of the picture. It's just the dumb computer. And then if we run it, okay, something's clearly happening wrong here. Oh, maybe he just, it must have been 5. It should hang. Yeah, it's hung, right? Because it's always guessing 5 each time. Computer was kind of showing me up there. So when this happens and it's hung, you basically can go to reset interactions and that'll break it. Control-C will also do it. But that's how easy it is to set up a dumb computer. I want you to make a smart computer. I want you to make a computer. See, dumb computer also ignores what the result is. It doesn't really care. But a good computer will take that result and alter its guess based on what the result was. So your job now is to create a computer player that will play. And then maybe what you can do is you can create a computer player and then a human player and have them take turns. And then you can kind of trade off and see who's smarter, the computer or the player or the human. But I think you have the basics now to create a really interesting guess number game. So I'm going to challenge you to go a little farther than that. Modify this. I will put what I just said up online as well as an assignment, and you have till at least through next B day to work on this. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording here.